Before starting this video, big thanks to Private Division and Intercept Games for sending me an early copy of KSP2 for me to try out this past week. It's finally here, KSP2, the long-awaited sequel to the hit game Spaceflight Kerbal Space Program. In getting an early copy, I felt like a kid at Christmas. This is a game I've been hyped about ever since it was first announced in 2019. All my plans for this week scrapped, I knew I was going to be playing it non-stop. So, do you know what I've done this week? I went and played Project Zomboid with my friends. Yes, somehow, a game I've been excited and incredibly hopeful for has left such a sour taste in my mouth. The only reason I kept playing it this week was to do this video. I feel really quite bad about saying this. I got given a free copy, but I was told to be truthful, and well, this video title is KSP2, The Honest Truth. Rather than getting straight into some of the crippling problems that currently plague the game, let's talk about what the game has done right so far, and what is good about it. Firstly, the planets from orbit look great, and the terrain is quite different from KSP1. Lots more flat land to land on, and even so, the height maps on the ground look way more interesting. On the surface, things could look a little better, and maybe with requirements such as a 3080 to run on high, you'd think they would. But hopefully with optimizations and upgrades, they will do exactly that. The planets and moons look more like their real-life counterparts too. That may or may not be a positive to some, but the moon now has basaltic flats. The ice caps on Juno are much smaller. It looks a lot more like our real solar system, which I quite like, being an RSS player. The new parts look fantastic, both in the VAB and in flight, and the new parts we have are a nice addition, even if they are basically all of the parts from the near future suite of mods from KSP1. Looks like the dev team really did put Natea to work. The launch countdown sequence is a really nice touch that adds a layer of immersion to the game that was previously not there, and the sound design for the game is amazing. Hearing the engines roar and crackle into life when you fire them up is breathtaking. I know the devs spent some time recording real-life rocket sounds, and it shows. The in-game adaptive music is also a really nice addition, and my first attempt at landing on Juno was made quite epic from the soundtrack. Even if it was rather comical being two giant balls and the almighty all-powerful new swerve engine. And that's about it for the good. Now for the bad, the ugly, and the downright disastrous. One question on everyone's mind, the performance. On my 3070 Ti set to all highest graphics at 180p, I do get somewhat decent frames, but there are times when the game lags quite hard. Looking back at the Space Center around a couple of minutes after launching, looking at Kerbin from space, having a craft which contains more than 50 parts. Yeah, the performance isn't brilliant, but it does run. One thing about this video, I will not be speeding up any footage in editing, so you can get a feel for how the game runs with my specs, which will also be included in the description if you are curious. Okay, so I knew breaking ground parts and the like weren't going to be in KSP2, and I'm not bothered about that at all, really. Some parts missing is fine. We've got lots of new parts to play with instead, but what is bad is some really basic quality of life stuff that is not present in the game. The first thing, there is no thrust away indicator per stage. This is something that has been in the first game for as long as I can remember. I'm fairly sure they were there even before Delta V readouts were added in stock. The only thrust away you were given in the VAB is your first stage at sea level on Kerbin. This is not okay. How the hell are you supposed to design a Tylo lander, an Eve ascent stage, basically anything that isn't your first stage? Where is this button that lets you change what celestial body you're currently planning around and change between vacuum and sea level values? This is something I encountered with other spaceflight games, such as Spaceflight Simulator, and a reason I don't really play them. Kerbal Space Program 1 did this perfectly, and I am sorely missing it right now. This isn't just applicable in the VAB, but also in flight. As far as I know, there is currently no way to determine your thrust-to-weight ratio in flight. This is not good. A similar issue is burn times. They don't exist. Not in the VAB when designing, nor in flight. Not even when you plot out a maneuver. Well, at least not until you start the maneuver. Then it will tell you how long is left of your burn. So, say you have a 0.1 second long burn, which I had several times during interplanetary corrections, you don't know it will only take 0.1 seconds until you start. So there I was hitting Z and completely overburning because I had no idea how long it would take. Speaking of maneuvers, there is no maneuver planner and no precision maneuver tool. The maneuver planner, something added in the last update of KSP1, admittedly isn't brilliant, but at least it's something. I guess in KSP2, for now, we're back to getting out our protractors and calculating the angle manually whenever we want to go interplanetary, or at least until MechJeb 3 makes its way over. The lack of a precision maneuver planner means the only way to adjust your current maneuver is the old-fashioned way of creating a node and pulling. Not brilliant for fine-tuning your trajectories. I will be talking more about maneuvers in the next section, but on to the next thing, which is, as far as I could tell, there is currently no cheat menu. I know this sounds a bit weird, but I wanted to get some footage of all the planets, and without the cheat menu, I was unable to get to them, unless I flew all the way there. This combined with the lack of a maneuver planner was quite annoying to quickly get some footage for this video. I tried multiple keybinds to get it up with no luck. This is also a problem if you want to test a certain part of a mission, such as an Eve ascent stage, without having to build the entire vessel and flying it to Eve. Maybe that's just something I do personally that other people might not have a problem with, but it is certainly much more time consuming and not really in a fun way. And finally, and this is a big one, no auto strut. In my honest opinion, the rigidity of rockets in Kerbal Space Program 2 is probably at least twice as bad as it is in the first game. Every single rocket I was launching looked like it was one blue pill short of a party and caused many issues flying. This was even after strutting everything together using the normal struts in the game, but they only reach so far, and God forbid you want to have a section of your design connected by 2 docking ports, that just won't happen. I will say though, struts actually snapping in Kerbal Space Program 2 is really nice. I know many people over the course of the run-up to the game's release were complaining about the new UI. I was a staunch defender of the new UI, and I thought it looked really sleek and interesting. I still think it does look very sleek, but there are some problems with it. I've already mentioned no thrust-to-weight ratio at all, but there is space on the staging menu where hopefully that can be slotted in. But things like your altitude rounding to the nearest kilometer when you go 100 kilometers above sea level is a pain for getting precise orbits. I've already mentioned the lack of a precision maneuver editor, and actually those are really my only gripes with the UI. Apart from that, I still think it looks pretty damn nice. Next up is the maneuver planner, the quintessential tool for getting anywhere with any sort of efficiency in this game. I was so hopeful that the system in KSP2 would vastly improve and build upon the system we have in the first game, but it's pretty much the old push and pull system from the first game, with a new coat of paint, but lacking the ability to skip orbits. I'm sure that's going to be great for whenever I attempt to rendezvous in-game. In its defense, it doesn't seem to jump around as much when you move it, but it still has the same problems from the first game, such as when trying to move its position, you might accidentally drag one of the vectors changing your maneuver. There is now a button to just move it, but you have to click and hold it, which I personally found quite unintuitive. I've already mentioned several times the lack of a precision editor, but one real issue I had with plotting trajectories using the maneuver planner is that when trying to pin your planned apoapsis or periapsis or anything such as intersects, if you then go and try and change the maneuver, the pin goes. This makes it quite difficult to get any sort of decent encounter using the planner, and combined with a very annoying bug I'll get onto made it difficult even getting a close flyby of the moon. Going interplanetary just exacerbated that problem. One of the key selling points of Kerbal 2 was to make the game more accessible, and it might just be me set in my ways, but getting anywhere in KSP2 was much harder than I found in the first game. Getting anywhere though requires Delta V, and brilliant! We have Delta V readouts in this game from the start. Seriously, it took way too long for the first game to implement those. However, the readouts are rubbish. More often than not, they don't give you any numbers at all. They change randomly when messing around with different assemblies whilst designing, and overall, the readouts right now are pretty much completely broken. At least we have a nice trip planner to tell us how much Delta V it takes to get somewhere, even if we don't know how much our craft we are designing has. Speaking of designing, the new all-in-one, all-singing, all-dancing vehicle assembly building, combining both the spaceplane hangar and the VAB from the first game, into one. That means you have the same camera controls for building long vessels such as planes, as well as building tall vessels such as rockets. Have a think, could that be problematic? Well, I certainly found it very unintuitive when I was trying to design craft. Moving up and down, you now have to click and drag with the middle mouse button, which is quite an inconvenient way of moving considering it barely moves at all when you do that. You can just click the middle mouse button to quickly look at a part, but I feel the old way of scrolling to move up and down was much easier to build rockets with. You know, the things that most people in this game will be building. The new blueprint feature is pretty cool, and I did find myself using it quite often, but still, the overall feeling of the VAB is that it's not quite as easy to manage as in the first game. But it isn't terrible, and this could very well just be me being very set in my ways from KSP1. If you pick up this game and never played the first one, I'd love to know your thoughts on this in the comments. And now for my least favourite thing I've encountered that the first game did better. The new part manager. It's awful. It needs to go. Okay, maybe that's a bit harsh, but I don't want to see every single part of my vessel whenever I right-click a single part. When I'm on the launch pad checking my engines, why would I care about my docking port on my moon lander? This is only made worse by the fact that whenever you right-click on your vessel when you have more than a handful of parts, it takes a few seconds to bring up the menu, both in the VAB and in flight. It really is a massive downgrade from the part action window in the first game, and I really hope either something better gets implemented or at least the game freezing gets fixed soon. This one will only be short, but the camera tools in the game I think are improved for the most part, but I still do miss some of the functionality of the old game. As far as I know, you can no longer change your field of view using Alt and Scroll like in Kerbal 1, and you can't use the middle mouse button to change where your ship lies on the screen. You can, however, use the arrow keys to move things around, but this seemed a bit weird and probably just needs a bit of getting used to. Some of the new camera modes, though, are really nice, and I feel the camera at the moment is pretty good. There are just maybe a few small improvements that could make it absolutely wonderful. Hopefully a lot of these bugs will be patched out pretty quickly. Whilst playing this week, I was unaware of where I could send bug reports, but now that the game is out and I can talk about it, I have quite the list to send. Starting off, the game crashes a lot. For me, on average, around once per hour. This is obviously somewhat annoying, but this also leads me on to say the loading times are great. KSP2 loads so much faster than the first game. At least that's what it feels like. I didn't time it, and maybe my position on mods in the first one has skewed my opinion here slightly, but even loading a completely stock install of Kerbal 1 feels like it takes longer, so that's a positive. Trajectories are currently really bugged. They rarely show up at all when you enter another body's sphere of influence. Whilst playing this week, I went to the Moon, Dres, and Juna multiple times, and I only saw my trajectory entering those sphere of influences once. This, with no maneuver tool, no burn times, a worse maneuver planner, made going interplanetary just straight up painful. It got to the point where I stopped bothering being efficient and just built much larger stages with excess delta V to go anywhere, but doing this made the rockets more likely to wobble around and explode because of how floppy they were. And speaking of rockets exploding, well, that happened a lot. For no reason. Absolutely no reason whatsoever. My first attempt at a Juna mission I tried many times. I changed the design a lot, and still, just before my first stage engines cut out, the entire craft would either explode or the mission would fail and I would be unable to switch back to my vessel despite the vessel still being intact. This also happened when I tried to undock 2 parts in Juna orbit. After the Juna incident, I thought I'd load a quick save to try and do it again. Still the same problem. And then when trying to load a save again after that, the game crashed. So I loaded it back up and saw that my last save was from about an hour previously. Saves right now are broken. The game seems very temperamental whether it will accept when I save it or not. And several times when loading the game after a crash, my last attempt at saving was nowhere to be seen, and I had to revert to a previous autosave. This was very frustrating, losing hours of work. There were also several times I'd attempt to launch a vessel after reverting to the VAB, after the aforementioned random explosions, and it just wouldn't. I would be stuck in the VAB, looking at my craft, hitting the launch button, and nothing would happen. This was where most of my crashes came from, but once I managed to save and exit to the main menu, the game didn't actually save though, tried launching my save again, and ended up stuck on the main menu screen with nothing but the background. I went away, made myself a drink, went to the shops, played with my cats, and took a shower, and after all this, which probably was about an hour's time, the game was still stuck in the same position, and when I tried to close it down, my entire PC crashed, and after booting it back up, I could no longer open the game. Admittedly, there was an update, and after downloading that, it worked again, so that's probably completely my fault there. But if you want to go see someone's perspective about not even being able to get the game to run at all after it crashed, I'd highly recommend you going and checking out Beardy's video, featuring me, because, well, we had lots to talk about. One of the main points I recall the devs saying about KSP2 is that they killed the Kraken. Oh boy, we were lied to. The Kraken is still very much present, and quite possibly even more angry than before, as I discovered while trying to build my first ever space station. Another key focus for the game, as already mentioned, was to make it more accessible, hence the new tutorials included. I did go and check out some of them because the VAB was really quite weird, but good luck doing more than a couple in a row, because that will just lead to a crash, or lead to parts of the tutorials staying on the screen way after you've finished it. I personally didn't get any footage of this, but you can see this in Beardy's video with Apollo's arrow. This is something the devs are aware of though, and for all the new players' sake, I really hope this gets fixed soon. So, after a few days of playing, I am somewhat enjoying the game a bit more, but I think that's more down to me picking missions that the game can currently accommodate, such as building a space station in low Kerbal orbit using only space shuttles. When this video goes live, I should also be live continuing on with that task, but I will say even that has been plagued with bugs and problems. When I first found out I was getting the game early, my idea for my first video would be to do a single launch grand tour around the system, because I quite liked the idea of being the first person to do that in the second game. There is absolutely no way I could have done that, at least not in the time I had due to the problems I've mentioned. No auto strut would mean any craft that size would not work. Maneuver tools being bad and bugged wouldn't make flying it a pain, and the part manager freezing my game for seconds when I click on anything would have made designing it a chore. Also, being unable to check my thruster weight per body meant that if I wanted to make an Eve lander and ascent vehicle, I'd have to go all the way to Eve just to see if it worked or not, and there being no cheat menu to get there, that would have been a lot of flying. KSP2, right now, in its current state, I can't really recommend. Not with the mods and performance we have in KSP1. Parts of modded KSP1 look vastly better than what we have in KSP2, and you don't need a supercomputer to run that. That being said, with a few bug fixes and some sorely needed quality of life additions, please change the part manager and give me thruster weight ratios per stage back. I think this game could definitely be in a playable state. Right now it's not. And right now, it's not fun. I really don't intend for this video to be a rant or for it to sound like I'm shitting on the game, but you can probably tell I'm quite disappointed. I know it's early access, and you come to expect these sort of things from early access titles, but earlier on in the video, I said I was playing Zomboid. That is also early access, and that game is f***ing amazing. But that's my 2 cents on the game right now. I want this game to do well, I really do. So if you like what you see so far, maybe give it a try. I know I will be playing it myself some more over the coming weeks to see if my opinion changes, and who knows, with some of those fixes mentioned, it could get to the point where it's a solid foundation for a fantastic game. A big thanks to Pentium, So Not The Hero Type, That Unreal Guy, Zaretya, and the rest of my patrons and members for their continued support. I have been Karnasa, like and subscribe for more, and I will see you later.